So I have a 7-year-old son who I don't get to see nearly as often as I would like. I work from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on weekdays, and by the time I get home, my son is getting ready to go to bed. My wife is a stay-at-home, so she does most of the childcare. On weekends, I spend time with Nick, but my wife always hovers around him. I never get to spend any alone time with Nick, and anytime I try to do something with him, she always has to be involved. Mario Kart, catch, playing with his wrestling toys. I never get to have just father-son moments with him, and it irks me as it makes me feel like I'm just an accessory as a parent to her. She gets to be with Nick and have alone time when I'm at work on weekdays. And on the weekends, I never get any alone bonding time. I have told her this multiple times, and she says there's nothing wrong with always being around. I have said that obviously we should be spending time together as a family unit, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't get an hour or two on the weekends where it's just him and me. So, on Saturday, I decided to take Nick to a local arcade and grab some ice cream. I know on Wednesday, my wife is going with him to an amateur wrestling show and stopping at his favorite restaurant after. When I told my wife I was going to take him alone, she got really upset and said it's ridiculous that she can't come as well. I told her how she's going to have a fun day with Nick on Wednesday, and I'd really like to make my own memories with him. She got upset and told me to just leave and slam the bedroom door behind me. So I took Nick and we had a blast together. It's probably the first time in close to a year I got to do something like that with just the two of us. On the way home, she texted that she doesn't feel like making dinner. I said no problem and grabbed us some Chinese takeout, her favorite. And when we got home, she refused to eat and wouldn't talk to me. She then stormed out of the house at about 7:30 and said she'll be back late and not to wait up. I then got a text from her sister at around midnight saying I really need to talk to my wife, and that she went over there and got blackout drunk and wouldn't stop sobbing about how I don't love her and don't want to spend time with her. The next morning, she came home and I asked her to talk and she refused. She said she's fine and just had a bit of an episode. I didn't push and gave her space for most of the day. When we went to bed for the night, she said I was a complete jerk and I should never try to take a child away from their mother. I said I'm not taking Nick away from her, and she's being insane for reacting like this for spending a few hours with my son at the arcade. Today, I woke up and decided to take the day off work because I wanted to spend some time with her, and when I told her, she was upset and said she's running errands, so there's no point. I said, well, I'll go with her, and she said she doesn't want me with her and left the house in a rush. I feel like she's overreacting to an extreme level to the point it seems like she's having a manic episode. She's never acted like this in the 11 years we've been together, and I almost feel like I'm being gaslit into believing what I did was awful. Edit. Just want to clear up a couple of things. 1. My wife has never acted like this before, and besides the hovering, we have had very few arguments. She takes care of the house, cooking, cleaning, and my son very well. These last few days have been very uncharacteristic of her. 2. I've seen a good amount of people comment on how she may need help with alcoholism. She is not a regular drinker, and that is why her sister felt the need to comment about her showing up and getting drunk. 3. The issue with her has not been that she doesn't get enough time with me. She stated a couple of times that it was wrong for me to take my son to have fun without her. She hasn't once mentioned not feeling that I spend enough time with her, though I definitely don't. 4. When this blows over, I'm going to suggest her working a part-time job while Nick is at school, so I can start coming home at 5 instead of working overtime every day. Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. OP, something is wrong with your wife. You seem to love her, so I would recommend couples counseling. Her reaction is not normal. Hell, she could treat herself to shopping, a spa day, reading, or anything while you and your son hang out. I cannot understand why she feels it is a personal attack. I'm a woman, and I don't think there was anything wrong with you leaving because her crying made 0 sense. Comment 2. I think you could benefit from couples counseling, and that your wife could benefit from individual counseling. You're not wrong for wanting to spend time alone with your son. Her getting blackout drunk over it is why I think she could benefit from individual counseling. Not the idiot. Now, for the update, thank you for sticking with me through this. A lot has happened since my last post. The tension in the house has been thick enough to cut with a knife. My wife's behavior has been spiraling, and I've been walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace. I thought things would cool down after the arcade incident, but it's only gotten worse. Last Tuesday, I came home to find Nick sitting on the couch, eyes glued to the TV, and my wife nowhere in sight. It was odd because she's always there, hovering, as I've mentioned before. I asked Nick where his mom was, and he shrugged, not looking away from his cartoons. I checked the house, and she wasn't there. I called her phone. No answer. Panic set in. It wasn't like her to leave without saying anything. Hours passed, and she finally walked through the door, bags of shopping in hand, acting like nothing was wrong. I confronted her about leaving Nick alone, and she brushed it off, saying she needed me time and that I was overreacting. But leaving a 7-year-old alone, that's not just me time, that's neglect. I decided to take action. I arranged for my sister to watch Nick after school, so he wouldn't be alone if my wife decided to disappear again. My wife was furious when she found out. She accused me of not trusting her, of trying to take Nick away from her. I tried to explain it was for Nick's safety, but she wouldn't listen. Then came the amateur wrestling show on Wednesday. My wife and Nick went, but they didn't come home afterward. I called her sister, who had no idea where they were. Finally, at 11 p.m., my wife texted saying they were staying at a hotel because she needed space. I didn't sleep that night, worrying about Nick and what my wife was going through. The next day, I took another day off work. When they came back, Nick ran to me saying they never made it to the restaurant and that he was hungry. My wife locked herself in the bedroom. I made Nick some breakfast and tried to talk to her through the door, but she wouldn't open up. I've been trying to keep things normal for Nick, but it's hard. He's confused and misses his mom's attention. I've been taking him to school and picking him up, making meals and trying to fill in the gaps. My wife has been distant, barely speaking to me or Nick. Yesterday, I made a mistake that changed everything. I lost my temper. After days of silence, I demanded my wife talk to me, to tell me what was going on. She finally broke down and admitted she felt replaced, that my wanting alone time with Nick made her feel like she wasn't a good enough mother. She was scared I was trying to take him away from her. I reassured her that wasn't the case, that I just wanted to bond with my son. I suggested we go to counseling to work through these feelings. She agreed reluctantly. It's a start, but there's a long road ahead. Today, things are a bit calmer. We've scheduled our first counseling session for next week. I'm hopeful we can get to the root of the problem and become a stronger family unit. Nick seems happier now that there's less yelling, and my wife is starting to come out of her shell again. Thank you for reading. My wife dies and I find out she was cheating with plans to steal my fortune. But when her lover tries to ruin my career, I make sure he regrets crossing me and teach my kids the price of betrayal. The wound is still a bit fresh. A month ago, my wife of 22 years tragically died in a car crash. Cynthia was one of those drivers who loved to stare into her phone, and unfortunately, this bad habit caught up with her in the last week of January. I was pretty devastated when the police showed up at my door and told me she had a fatal accident, and I wanted to honor her somehow. At the time of the accident, I had no idea she was having an affair. The last 4 or 5 months, I did notice she was pulling away, and our intimacy decreased, but I thought this was just something that happened to couples after 20 years, so I didn't pay much mind to it. But, at least from what she told me, Cynthia started getting into writing. She was constantly on her laptop typing away at all hours. She told me she was working on a fantasy book, hopefully the first of a series. When I asked for more, she said it was about a fantasy world where a super advanced human race appears and interacts with orcs and elves and magic with laser guns and high tech. It sounded very cool, and Cynthia promised that as soon as she had a first draft she liked, she would let me read it. I decided to honor her by getting the draft of her book and hiring a writer to clean it up and publish it with a novelty press. I got on her laptop and no book, no sign at all. I opened her Chrome, thinking she might have written it in Google Drive, and saw a bunch of pinned tabs. One was a Facebook Messenger tab with a ton of her messages with a man named John. I have no idea who John is, never met him, but they talked about meeting up, exchanged photos, everything. The last message John sent her was 2 days before Cynthia's accident, the two saying they loved each other and him saying he was going on a business trip to Germany. The messages between Cynthia and John have shown they had met up at the house more than once, so I already had the locks changed. Not sure if John is back yet, and frankly don't care if he is. I was thoroughly devastated. She did have a Google Drive tab, but in her drive wasn't a book about elves versus Vulcans, but a shared document with John. The document was a plan that she and John drafted on how to divorce me, turn the kids against me, and take our home and as much money as possible. One thing she noted was she has been taking money, a few $100s a month, and putting it in a separate account. I got the bank thing sorted out and the money in the kids' college account. I've also been going to therapy twice a week now. It is hard to be mad at someone dead, especially someone everyone else in your life is grieving and praising as a wonderful wife and mother. I have asked my therapist if I should tell my kids about what Cynthia has done and what she was planning to do. My therapist cautioned me about this. He said that they just lost their mother, and being told this would be condemning her memory. Damnatio memoriae. Maybe now is not the time, but I think eventually would be a time for my kids to know. Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. My children were grown and still had their father on a pedestal. I eventually told them that he might have been a good father, but he wasn't a good husband. They got it. They were 4 and 5 years old when he died, and in their 20s when I said that. They quit comparing their stepdad so harshly. Comment 2. You would be the jerk, but I would suggest finding out who this John is and making sure he does not show up in your lives, such as at the funeral or anything. It sounds like they had some big plans involving your children, and who knows what this pause could say. Now for the update, thanks for sticking with me through this. So here's what went down this past week. Just when I thought things couldn't get more twisted, they did. I found out that John, the guy my wife was seeing, is actually my boss's son. I only found out because he showed up at my office looking for me. He didn't know about Cynthia's accident, and he was back from Germany, all smiles, asking if she'd mentioned him. I played it cool, but inside I was boiling. Turns out John's been using company resources to fund his little escapades with my wife. I stumbled upon this when I accidentally received an email meant for him, detailing a business expense that was clearly a trip they took together. I could have blown the whistle right there, but I hesitated. My job's on the line, and the kids need stability now more than ever. But then, the bombshell dropped. My daughter, who's been acting out since her mom passed, got suspended from school. She got into a fight with a girl who was bad-mouthing Cynthia. I had to leave work and pick her up. On the drive home, she broke down and confessed she knew about the affair. She'd seen messages on her mom's phone months ago, but didn't know how to tell me. I was floored. My own daughter carrying this burden, and here I was, thinking I could protect them from the truth. It made me question everything, including whether keeping silent was the right thing to do. The next day, I confronted John. I told him I knew everything and that he had to resign from the company or I'd expose him. He laughed in my face, said his dad would never believe me over him. But I had proof, and when I showed him the email, his face went white. He agreed to resign quietly. I thought that was the end of it, but no. My boss called me into his office, furious. John had spun a story about me blackmailing him, and now my job was on the line. I had to come clean about everything, show my boss the messages, the plans, the stolen money. It was humiliating, and I felt like I was betraying Cynthia all over again, even though she betrayed me first. In the end, my boss believed me. He was disgusted by his son's actions and apologized for the mess. He offered me leave to sort things out with my family, but I could tell our relationship would never be the same. I felt like I'd won, but at what cost? And then, as if I hadn't had enough, I came home to find my son had found the divorce plan document. He was sitting on the living room floor, papers scattered everywhere, tears streaming down his face. He looked up at me, and I saw the same betrayal I'd felt. I sat down next to him, and we didn't say anything for the longest time. We just sat there, in the wreckage of our family, trying to make sense of it all. I had to forgive Cynthia, not for her, but for my kids. They needed to remember their mother as the woman who loved them, not the stranger in those messages. It made me look weak, maybe even desperate, but I had to think about what was best for them. So that's where I'm at, picking up the pieces, trying to rebuild what's been broken, and hoping that in time, we'll find some semblance of normal again. Thanks for reading. My husband suggested I sell my plasma to pay our bills, so I gave him an ultimatum, and when a friend betrayed us by spreading lies, I exposed their deceit and watched as their reputation crumbled. My 38-year-old husband and I have been married for 12 years and have 2 daughters who are 10 and 7 years old. We have experienced a lot of stress due to our failed restaurant business that we started together after quitting our jobs and taking out loans. In our mid-20s, I worked as a retail team lead to support my husband through his master's program, and we agreed to live below our means in order to pursue his dream of owning a restaurant. I did the bookkeeping for the restaurant, filled in for employees who quit or called in sick, and helped build a team. After a few successful months, my husband told me to take a step back and focus on our daughters and enjoy some free time and spending money as a reward for my hard work. However, the costs of running the restaurant increased, and our town experienced layoffs, causing a decline in customers dining out. My husband also acknowledges that the initial surge in sales was due in part to the novelty of a new restaurant in town. Unfortunately, my husband's emotional reactions led to damaged relationships with suppliers, and the business ultimately failed, leaving us with significant debt. On top of this, our older daughter has type 1 diabetes, and our other daughter has a developmental disability that requires therapy with an RBT. Due to financial stress, my husband has turned to poverty finance forums, and we had to move into an apartment with pest control issues in order to afford our expenses. We have both been applying for jobs in hopes of securing stable income and benefits. However, our relationship has become strained, and we are currently sleeping separately. Recently, my husband's low-income friends suggested that we donate plasma as a way to make extra money for medical expenses. My husband went ahead and donated plasma without informing me, and he strongly hinted that this was how we were able to afford food and medical care. He suggested that I should also donate, but I declined due to my fear of needles and the thought of doing it in front of other donors. I was furious when my husband tried to guilt me into this and calculate the potential earnings I could make from essentially selling my body. I made it clear that if he ever brings it up again, our relationship would be over, and I would seek legal advice. Am I the antagonist for setting this strong boundary? Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Let me get this straight. Your husband has a master's degree, and you've both worked in the restaurant industry, and neither of you can find a job? I call bullsh. The service industries are still clamoring for employees. Find it hard to believe Target or TJ Maxx or any restaurant are not hiring. On top of that, there are multiple federal and state programs to help with your children's medical costs/support. There's food stamps. There are so many ways to do this that don't require you to give plasma or you to divorce your husband. I hope to God this is fake because I pity these children. You are the a-hole. Comment 2. You are the a-hole. Divorce will not fix your finances or pay for your 2 daughters' medical needs. Kudos to your husband for being willing to sell plasma to stay afloat. I did it myself during my student years. If it's not for you, just continue to decline without making nuclear threats to your marriage. You may need to consider bankruptcy to clear your debts. In the meantime, take any job that is offered and appreciate your spouse for being able to do something that you can't to put food on the table. Now for the update. Thanks for coming back to hear more about what's been going on. So the other day, my husband's friend, the one who's always hanging around our place, started acting weird. He's been helping us out since the restaurant closed, giving advice and all. But lately, he's been too close for comfort, especially with my husband not around much, trying to find work. This friend, let's call him Mr. Helpful. He's been coming over more often, and not just to see my husband. He's been offering to fix things around the apartment, which is nice, but he's also been asking a lot of personal questions. Stuff about our finances, how we're coping, and even about my relationship with my husband. Then, out of nowhere, Mr. Helpful suggests that he could lend us money to get by. It sounded good at first, but he wanted to make a deal that felt off. He said he'd give us the cash, but in return, he wanted me to sign some papers, making him a partner in any future business we start. I didn't like the sound of that, but I didn't say anything to my husband yet. Next thing I know, Mr. Helpful is talking to our landlord behind our backs. Suddenly, our rent is overdue, and there's talk of eviction. I couldn't believe it. We were always on time with rent, even with everything going on. Turns out Mr. Helpful told the landlord we were planning to move and start a new business, which was news to me. I confronted him, and he acted all innocent, saying he was just trying to help us find a better place, but it didn't add up. I started to feel like he was trying to push us out for some reason. And then it hit me. He was the one who suggested the plasma donation idea to my husband in the first place. It's like he's been playing us, making us more desperate so he can swoop in and take control. And my husband, he's so stressed he's not seeing it. He thinks Mr. Helpful is our savior or something. But wait, it gets worse. I found out that Mr. Helpful has been spreading rumors around town about us, about how we're failing and can't handle our money. It's like he's trying to ruin our reputation so no one will help us. I don't get it. What does he gain from making us look bad? And then, the biggest blow of all, I got a call from the school. Our younger daughter, the one with the developmental disability, she's been acting out, and they think it's because of the stress at home. They're talking about special programs and extra support, which we can't afford right now. It's like everything is falling apart, and Mr. Helpful is there, pretending to be the good guy. I'm so angry at him, at the whole situation, but I can't let my husband know how bad it is. He's already on edge, and this would just push him over. I've got to handle this on my own, figure out Mr. Helpful's game before it's too late. Thanks for listening to all this. It's been a rough few days. If you liked this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day!